What even is learning? It's a question you may have never even asked yourself, yet it's so vital for learning. So let's start off with understanding what we're trying to do, and then we can figure out how to get it. So what is learning? Well, there's two aspects to learning. There's the physical and there's the mental. So most of us, at least I for the longest time, viewed learning just from a mental standpoint. I know something, I learned something, that means I got this thing that I now know. And it's this ethereal, intangible thing. That's not reality though. Learning is physically changing your brain. That's what learning is physically. It's adding new neural connections and or strengthening old ones. So yeah, if you want to learn something, you've got to physically change your brain. And when you learned something, you changed your brain. Pretty cool. So that's the physical aspect, adding new neural connections or strengthening old connections. And by strengthening old connections, I mean thickening the myelin, the insulation around that neural connection, that neuron, so that the signals between those neurons and that neural pathway become more efficient, quicker, and require less energy. There's the physical aspect of learning. So the mental aspect of learning. What is the mental aspect of learning? Well, you probably already got an assumption of what that is. To keep it simple, what I define learning as mentally is adding information to long-term memory. So there you go. Learning is physical, learning is mental. There's duality. And every time you learn something, you do both. It's not one or the other. So now we know a little bit more about learning and what learning is. We can dive into the implications of what this means. So from the physical aspect, if learning is changing your brain, how do we tell the brain that it needs to change? And there's lots of ways you could take this, but to keep it simple, how I think of it is, if we want the brain to change, we need to signal to the brain that something is important. Because the brain is efficient. The brain doesn't want to waste energy. And if the brain changed due to all experience and all the inputs, everything we're taking in all the time, we would be able to do nothing. We would not be able to function. So our brain is selective about what it learns, and it only learns things it deems important. So how do we tell the brain, hey, this information is important? There's many ways we can do this. And a lot of the ways, or actually all the ways, you've already done. Probably not consciously, but let's define them. Ways to signal the brain that information is important. First, repetitions. So we all know the more we do something, the more likely it's going to stay in our head. Right? If you do something once, or you learn something once, read something once, it's probably not going to stay there. We all know that because you only saw it once. To the brain, it's like, cool, we saw this thing, we continue to survive, haven't seen it since, haven't seen it before then, not worth changing our brain for. We're good. There we go, repetitions. Number 2, use. And if you watched my video on the most effective study techniques, you already know this. Practice testing, also known as retrieval, pulling things out of your head. The first principle of learning, creation rather than consumption, using that information, pulling things out of your head. That's a way to show to the brain, hey, this is important. We use this. This is worth storing. This is worth strengthening. So there we go. Repetitions, retrieval. What are some other ways to signal the brain that information is important? Another way is exposure at an early age. The earlier, the better, right? So think about this. When we're young, we all know we're like sponges. Children are like sponges. They hear things, they start repeating things. They're always absorbing things. You can pick up languages like that. The longer you wait, the harder it is to learn certain things, right? We all know this. But why would exposure at an early age signal the brain that information is important and therefore change, add new neurons, strengthen neurons, etc.? Well, exposure at an early age, the earlier the better, because if you come across something when you're 2 years old, what's the likelihood that you're going to come across that same thing multiple times or at least once again in the future? Probably pretty high. If it's something you have to deal with early in life, it's probably going to be a reoccurring theme over your life. Versus if you are exposed to something for the first time at 75, hey, not likely you're going to see this again. Let's not store that. Not worth it. Right? That was 3. Number 4, movement and or exercise before and after studying or after receiving information. Why would that make sense? Well, if you're stagnant, if you're in one place and you're just sitting, the brain kind of goes into energy consumption mode and is like, we're good. We don't need to remember anything. We've got everything good for now. We're good. But when we start moving around through space, we're exposing ourselves to new environments, potential places for predators, potential places for food, water, potential places for other humans. There's lots of very valuable information when we move. So when we enter new environments, it's signaling the brain, hey, be aware. Some of this stuff might be important. And thus, information we receive before, during, or after movement and or exercise, when we're getting our heart rate up, it's signaling the brain like, hey, this might be important. We might need to remember some of this stuff. And so we're more plastic in those states rather than states of stagnation where everything's good. We got it figured out. So there we go. Repetitions, retrieval, exposure at an early age, exercise before and after. 5th one, a high emotional tether. What do I mean by this? Well, there's this term called one-time learning, which basically means exactly what it sounds like. One experience can permanently cement itself in your mind. And yeah, think about it for a little bit. Traumatic experiences from childhood, traumatic experiences from the past, traumatic experiences in general, where you're in a very aroused emotional state, you tend to remember those things pretty easily. Now, granted, you probably replay those, so then you're going through repetitions, but a strong emotional tether signals the brain, hey, this was a very important event in our life. Let's try to remember this and repeat it if it was really good emotions, or avoid it if it was really bad emotions. There we go. Emotions, number 5. And number 6, high concentration. So the more you concentrate on something, the higher likelihood you are going to learn it. Right? This is one's pretty intuitive as well. If you're not really paying attention to something, Literally, you're telling the brain, this isn't that important. Whereas if you're laser focused, eyes open, very wide, and you are just so tuned in, you're literally signaling the brain, hey, this is important. This is valuable. Let's remember this. Let's cement this into our long-term memory. So there we go. That was definitions of what learning is from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint, as well as 6 ways to signal to the brain, hey, information is important. This is worth investing the time and energy and nutrients into physically changing our brain. So hopefully you got some value from this, and if you think of any more ways to signal the brain that information is important, comment down below. Let me know. And if it helped you, let me know as well. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.